The pregnant woman's scream pierced through the auction house, but vanished beneath the rhythmic chanting of the auctioneer. Her pain, invisible to the sea of wealthy buyers, fixated on the gleaming thoroughbreds parading before them. She collapsed against the back row bench, crimson spreading across her simple cotton dress, as her body betrayed her weeks before her due date. No one turned. No one saw. The Thornfield horse auction had hosted royalty and celebrities, magnates and sheiks. A distressed farm girl meant nothing when millions changed hands with the subtle nod of a head or twitch of a manicured finger. Emma Wilson clutched her swollen belly, honey brown hair plastered to her forehead, as sweat beaded across her ashen face. The auction catalog slipped from her trembling fingers, falling forgotten to the sawdust-covered floor beneath her worn boots. She had scraped together every penny from her failing family farm for one desperate chance at buying a working horse, something to help salvage what remained of her inheritance. Now miles from the nearest hospital and surrounded by strangers who valued pedigrees over people, she bit her lip until it bled, stifling another cry as contractions ripped through her body. The security guard stationed at the entrance shifted uncomfortably, his eyes darting toward the disturbance before deliberately looking away. A woman in a Hermes scarf whispered something to her companion, both turning briefly to glance at Emma, before returning their attention to the magnificent black stallion, whose price had just surpassed 7 figures. Their lips curled with practiced distaste, as if her distress might somehow contaminate their perfectly cultivated afternoon. In the holding pens beyond the main arena, a bay mare with a scarred flank and dull coat suddenly lifted her head. Unlike the other auction horses with their gleaming coats and docile expressions, this mare's eyes burned with a fierce intelligence that had made her impossible to sell at previous auctions. The handlers kept their distance, wary of her reputation for unpredictable behavior and the vicious kicks that had sent 3 stable hands to the emergency room. Yet now she stood perfectly still, ears pricked forward as if listening to a sound no human could detect. Her nostrils flared, testing the air as her powerful muscles tensed beneath her neglected coat. The temporary metal gate separating the holding area from the main auction floor suddenly seemed inadequate against the intensity building in her powerful frame. The mare's eyes fixed on something beyond the barrier, something the wealthy patrons in their designer boots and tailored jackets had chosen to ignore. No one in the glittering auction hall could have predicted what would happen next when this forgotten mare and desperate woman's paths collided. No one imagined that in a place where worth was measured by bloodlines and bank accounts, true value would reveal itself in the most unexpected way. Emma Wilson had emptied the last of her savings account that morning, counting out crumpled bills on her kitchen table with shaking hands. $3,427.52. Everything she had left in the world after her husband's funeral costs, and the mounting medical bills from his long illness. The farm that had been in his family for generations was slipping through her fingers like sand, the bank's foreclosure notices piling up beside the unpaid invoices from feed suppliers who no longer extended credit. Her swollen belly made working the remaining fields impossible alone, and hired hands required money she simply didn't have. A sturdy workhorse was her last desperate hope to save what remained of the Wilson legacy before her baby arrived. The 30-mile drive to Thornfield in her rusted pickup truck had sent shooting pains through her lower back, but Emma had ignored them, focusing instead on the auction catalog and the handful of affordable prospects circled in faded red ink. Most were older horses, past their prime or with minor issues that wealthy buyers would avoid. Exactly what she needed. Not a champion, just a willing partner with 4 strong legs and a sound heart. She had parked far from the main entrance, saving the closer spots for the Bentleys and Jaguars that now gleamed in the Kentucky sun like alien spacecraft beside her dented Ford. The baby had been active all morning, kicking and shifting, as if sensing her anxiety. Dr. Harrison had warned her about taking it easy in these final weeks. But what choice did she have? The bank wouldn't delay foreclosure for her pregnancy, and the remaining cattle needed tending, whether her ankles were swollen or not. Emma had promised herself just this one trip, secure a horse, and then rest until delivery. The auction would be over by mid-afternoon, plenty of time to make the drive home and put her feet up before dark. She hadn't expected the climate-controlled auction house to be so cold, the metal benches so hard against her aching back. The glossy catalog photos mocked her with their perfection, champions with bloodlines tracing back to Secretariat and Man-O-War. Their starting bids more than she'd make in 5 years of bumper crops. As number after number sold for astronomical sums, Emma had felt increasingly out of place among the pearls and pocket squares, the casual millions exchanged with flicks of manicured hands. When the first real contraction hit, she had mistaken it for Braxton Hicks, breathing through it while keeping her eyes fixed on the auction block. But the second came harder, stealing her breath and sending panic coursing through her veins. The third brought moisture between her legs, a warm rush that soaked through her cotton dress. 8 weeks early, too soon for her baby to safely arrive, too far from the rural hospital that had already warned her about their limited NICU capabilities. Emma's vision blurred as the fourth contraction ripped through her body, sending her sliding from the bench to her knees, while wealthy strangers deliberately averted their gaze from her suffering. In the center holding pen stood a creature of contradictions, a bay mare whose weathered coat and protruding ribs told one story while her fierce eyes told another. Willow had once commanded respect on the prestigious tracks of Kentucky and New York, her powerful stride earning her 3 consecutive stakes victories before a minor tendon injury ended her racing career. The elegant brass nameplate on her halter had long since tarnished, but still carried the name that racing fans had once chanted from the grandstands. Those glory days had faded faster than morning mist under the harsh reality of a thoroughbred with no further use to the industry that had created her. The mare's ears pinned flat against her head as potential buyers approached her pen, her muscles tensing beneath her dull coat like coiled springs. Most kept their distance, warned by the red tag attached to her information card and the stories that circulated among the auction regulars. 3 handlers hospitalized in the last year alone. A veterinarian who still walked with a limp after attempting a routine vaccination. Even the stable boys at Thornfield refused to enter her enclosure, sliding her hay and water under the gate, rather than risk those teeth or the lightning-quick strikes of her front hooves. What the humans couldn't see when they looked at Willow were the memories etched into her body alongside the visible scars. The training barn, where electricity had replaced patience, where food and water were withheld until compliance was achieved. The succession of owners who viewed her injury not as something to heal, but as a betrayal of their investment. The final straw had come 6 months earlier, when her last owner, a red-faced man with whiskey on his breath and a cattle prod in his hand, had attempted to force the mare into a trailer bound for the Canadian slaughterhouses. 3 broken ribs and a concussion later, he had opted instead to recoup some losses through the auction, warning handlers to sedate her heavily before the sale. The sedatives had worn off earlier than expected, leaving Willow alert and dangerous in her temporary prison. She paced the perimeter of her pen, measuring its boundaries with each deliberate step, her intelligent eyes cataloging every human who passed by. The auction staff had placed her pen strategically away from the high-dollar consignments, not wanting her wildness to unsettle the docile show horses and pampered hunter-jumpers that would fetch 6 figures from the elite buyers. Auction veterans whispered that Willow would likely sell for meat price, her value reduced to the weight she would put on the scale rather than the heart that still burned within her. The Thornfield manager had already negotiated with the kill buyer who waited outside, his double-decker transport ready to haul unwanted horses to their final destination across the border. It seemed a foregone conclusion that this would be Willow's last day in Kentucky, her spirit finally broken by the system that had first created, then discarded her. Yet something unexpected flickered in the mare's gaze, as her ears suddenly swiveled toward the main auction hall. Not the fearful alertness of prey, but the focused intensity of a predator sensing opportunity. The heavy chain securing her gate suddenly seemed inadequate against the calculated intelligence that burned behind those knowing eyes. As the auctioneer's voice reached a fever pitch, Emma's pain intensified to an unbearable crescendo. Her fingernails dug half-moons into her palms, as she fought to remain silent, each contraction now washing over her like waves of shattered glass. The polished concrete floor beneath her felt ice cold against her skin as she slid further down, no longer able to maintain even a kneeling position. The wealthy patrons nearest her shifted their expensive boots away from the growing puddle beneath her dress, their faces masks of practiced indifference. Emma's lips formed the word help, but no sound emerged, her throat constricted with pain and the crushing weight of invisibility. Across the auction complex, separated by walls and crowds and social divides deeper than canyons, Willow's behavior suddenly changed. The mare had been pacing her holding pen with predatory focus, making the nervous stable boy a sign to watch her keep his distance. But without warning, she froze. Her ears, previously pinned flat against her skull in warning, suddenly shot forward, swiveling like radar dishes, seeking a distant signal. The whites of her eyes showed as her head lifted, nostrils flaring wide to draw in scents that no human could detect. The stable boy noticed the change immediately, his hand instinctively reaching for the tranquilizer gun kept nearby for emergencies. In his 3 years working at Thornfield, he had never seen a horse transform so completely. In an instant, Willow's aggressive energy hadn't diminished. If anything, it had intensified, but its nature had somehow shifted. There was purpose now, in her stillness, a focused intent that made the hair on the boy's arms stand on end. In the auction hall, Emma's vision began to tunnel, dark edges creeping inward as her body fought to preserve consciousness. The contractions were coming less than 2 minutes apart now, her untrained mind somehow recognizing this was too fast, too soon. The baby wasn't due for another 8 weeks. Rural hospitals weren't equipped for such premature births. Her thoughts scattered like startled birds as another wave of pain crashed through her system, prompting an involuntary cry that briefly cut through the auctioneer's chant, before being swallowed by the vastness of indifference surrounding her. Back in the holding area, Willow's reaction to this unseen, unheard stimulus escalated. A shudder ran through her powerful frame, muscles rippling beneath her dull coat. The chain securing her gait rattled as she pressed against it, testing its strength with a calculating intelligence that horses weren't supposed to possess. Her focus remained fixed on the wall separating the holding area from the main auction floor, as if she could see through concrete and steel to something beyond. The connection forming between desperate woman and forgotten horse defied logical explanation. They had never met, never shared space or time before this moment, yet something fundamental and primal was aligning between them. Two females cast aside by a system that valued them only for what they could produce, not for their inherent worth. Two creatures trapped in different ways, one by physical pain and societal indifference, the other by metal gates and mankind's cruelty. Something ancient and powerful was awakening in Willow's eyes, something that recognized a kindred spirit in peril and wouldn't be contained by mere chains much longer. The first indication that something extraordinary was happening came from the holding area, a crash of metal against concrete, followed by the frantic shouting of stable hands. The polished veneer of Thornfield's auction proceedings shattered as the unmistakable sound of pounding hooves echoed through the complex. Buyers who had spent decades around horses recognized the unique rhythm of equine panic, their heads turning toward the sound with expressions of alarm, replacing their practiced boredom. The auctioneer's voice faltered mid-bid, the number hanging incomplete in the suddenly electric air. Willow burst through the entrance of the main auction hall, like an avenging spirit, her scarred body transformed by purpose. Gone was the defeated posture of the holding pen. Her head was high, ears pinned back, nostrils flared wide, as she charged forward with the deadly focus of a predator. The red warning tag still dangled from her halter, fluttering like a battle flag, as she cleared the threshold with a powerful leap that sent splinters of wood flying from the decorative doors. A security guard reached for his radio, but froze as the mare's eyes locked with his, an intelligence too knowing, too calculating in that gaze for him to maintain his nerve. The crowd erupted in chaos, champagne flutes shattering against the floor as buyers abandoned their seats, scrambling toward exits and climbing over each other in their haste to escape. Women in designer riding boots stumbled on the sawdust-covered concrete, their perfectly manicured hands reaching out to steady themselves on anything within reach. Men who had commanded boardrooms and governed corporations shouted in undignified panic, their composed facades crumbling in the face of 600 pounds of focused equine determination. Yet Willow paid them no attention. She moved through the chaos with uncanny precision, neither slowing nor deviating from her path. Chairs toppled in her wake. Auction catalogs flew into the air like startled birds. But the mare's gaze remained fixed on a single point near the back of the room, where Emma lay curled around her swollen belly, oblivious to the pandemonium surrounding her. When Willow reached Emma, the transformation in the mare's demeanor was immediate and astonishing. The wild-eyed fury that had scattered the wealthiest horse enthusiasts in 3 states vanished, replaced by a gentleness that seemed impossible from an animal with her reputation. She lowered her head, breath hot and sweet against Emma's tear-streaked face, and then methodically positioned her body between the fallen woman and the remaining onlookers. The sudden silence was as shocking as the chaos had been moments before. Those brave enough to remain stood frozen, witnessing something that defied explanation. The mare who had sent 3 handlers to the hospital stood protectively over the pregnant woman, her posture now calm but vigilant. When a security guard took a hesitant step forward, Willow's ears flattened in warning, her teeth bared in a gesture universally understood. The message was unmistakable. No one would approach Emma without going through her first. The auctioneer's gavel lay forgotten on the podium, as the most unusual standoff in Thornfield's history unfolded on the auction floor. A fierce, discarded mare positioning herself as guardian to a woman deemed equally disposable by the glittering crowd that had now fallen silent in disbelief. Jack Mercer hadn't planned to attend the Thornfield auction that day. At 72, with arthritic knees that protested every morning and hands that sometimes trembled when he held his coffee cup, he had long since retired from veterinary practice, yet 4 decades of habitual Thursday auctions had ingrained themselves into his bones, pulling him to the familiar wooden benches where he had once evaluated potential purchases for wealthy clients. These days he came only to observe, a ghost from a different era of horsemanship, watching a world that valued pedigree over heart, price tags over potential. Unlike the panicked crowd surging toward the exits, Jack remained seated when Willow burst into the auction hall. His weathered face, lined with years under the Kentucky sun, registered neither fear nor surprise, but rather a quiet, evaluating interest. He had witnessed the full spectrum of equine behavior during his long career, had been kicked, bitten, and thrown more times than he could count, yet survived to develop an intuitive understanding that younger veterinarians with their modern techniques and digital diagnostics could never replicate. Something in Willow's focused determination struck him as extraordinary. This wasn't blind panic or aggression. This was purpose. Jack watched as the mare positioned herself protectively over the fallen pregnant woman, recognizing in that moment something his decades with horses had taught him. Animals often sense things that humans with all their sophisticated reasoning remained blind to. When others had retreated to a safe distance, Jack rose slowly from his seat, his movements deliberate and unhurried. He approached not with the cautious sidestep of someone afraid, but with the direct, open stride of a man who had nothing to hide. His faded denim shirt and worn boots carried the lingering sense of sweet feed and liniment, smells that horses associated with care rather than harm. Willow's ears flattened as he approached, her teeth bared in warning. Jack paused, giving her time to process his presence. His lips formed silent words that no one else could hear. Ancient sounds his Cherokee grandmother had taught him long ago. Whether it was these sounds or simply his calm energy that reached the mare, something in her posture shifted slightly. Permission granted rather than trust given. Emma lay trembling on the floor, another contraction visibly rippling across her abdomen. Jack knelt beside her with the creaking effort of old joints. his practiced eyes taking in her pallor, the damp fabric beneath her, the rhythm of her labored breathing. His gnarled fingers found her wrist, counting the racing pulse that confirmed what he already suspected. The baby was coming, weeks too early, in the worst possible circumstances. The Thornfield staff hovered at a distance, walkie-talkies squawking with confused communications. The manager's voice carried across the auction floor, assuring someone that the situation was under control, that the ambulance wasn't necessary yet, that this disruption wouldn't affect the scheduled sales. Jack's weathered face hardened as he glanced up, decades of professional courtesy evaporating in the face of such calculated indifference. With one hand still resting on Emma's forehead, Jack extended his other toward Willow. The mare, who had terrorized handlers for months, lowered her muzzle to his palm, nostrils flaring as she inhaled his scent. A silent understanding passed between them. Two aged souls, recognizing something kindred in each other. This woman needed help that the glossy, polished world of Thornfield was too self-absorbed to provide. And somehow, against all logic, the horse had recognized this truth before any human had bothered to see it. Jack's weathered hands worked with practiced efficiency, despite their arthritic joints. Years of veterinary muscle memory guiding his movements as he tended to Emma. The auction floor had transformed into an unlikely delivery room. The same sawdust that cushioned million-dollar hooves now pressed beneath a laboring woman's back. Emma's face contorted with another wave of pain, her body tensing as the contractions came with increasing frequency. The premature labor was progressing too quickly, the baby determined to enter the world 8 weeks before nature had intended, in perhaps the least welcoming environment imaginable. Willow remained a steadfast sentinel beside them, her posture alert yet calm, ears constantly moving to track the movements of onlookers who maintained their cautious distance. Whenever someone ventured too close, the mare would shift her position slightly, a subtle warning that required no interpretation. The security guards who had initially approached with catch poles and tranquilizer guns now stood back, uncertain how to proceed when the supposedly dangerous horse was the only one providing genuine assistance. Whispers rippled through the remaining crowd, wealthy spectators reluctant to leave despite the disruption, their morbid curiosity overriding their fear. Stories about Willow circulated among them, fragments of information assembled into a patchwork of speculation. A silver-haired woman in Jodhpurs murmured about the mare's racing career, how she'd once outrun a lightning storm at Churchill Downs, galloping through thunder with inexplicable fearlessness. An old trainer recalled rumors that Willow had once alerted stable hands to a fire before smoke detectors had registered the danger, saving a dozen valuable yearlings from certain death. Jack ignored the gossip, focused entirely on Emma's deteriorating condition. Her blood pressure was dropping dangerously low. He could tell just from the clamminess of her skin and the bluish tinge to her lips. The baby wouldn't wait for proper medical equipment or sterile conditions. With methodical calm, he removed his denim jacket and folded it beneath her head, then pulled a clean handkerchief from his pocket, using it to wipe the sweat from her forehead. His gentle murmurs of reassurance blended with Willow's occasional soft nickering, creating an unusual harmony that seemed to comfort Emma despite her pain. The auction manager paced at the periphery, his perfectly polished boots avoiding the scattered programs and abandoned champagne glasses that littered the floor. His frequent glances at his watch and hushed phone conversations made his priorities clear. Every minute of disruption represented thousands in potential lost commissions. When he announced that the ambulance was delayed by an accident on the highway, his voice carried more annoyance than concern. What happened next astonished even Jack, who had witnessed countless examples of equine intuition throughout his career. As Emma's breathing became more labored, Willow slowly lowered herself to the ground beside her, a behavior so unnatural for a horse, particularly one with Willow's history of abuse and fear, that a collective gasp rose from the onlookers. The mare lay with her warm body curved protectively around Emma, offering comfort and warmth that the cold concrete floor could not provide. Jack's eyes met Willow's, finding in her gaze a depth of understanding that transcended the supposed boundaries between species. He had spent his life healing animals, and now, in this most unlikely place, an animal was helping him heal a human. As Emma's hand instinctively reached out to grasp the mare's mane, Jack knew with absolute certainty that they were witnessing something beyond scientific explanation, a connection formed through desperation and compassion that defied everything the wealthy patrons of Thornfield thought they knew about the creatures they bought and sold, like commodities. The wailing sirens cut through the tense atmosphere of the auction house, red and blue lights flashing against the polished wooden walls as paramedics rushed through the main entrance with determined efficiency. Their practiced movements stood in stark contrast to the paralyzed uncertainty that had gripped the Thornfield staff for the past hour. The medical team navigated around the scattered chairs and abandoned champagne flutes, equipment bags bouncing against their legs as they approached the unusual scene at the center of the auction floor. A laboring woman supported by an elderly man and a bay mare that refused to move from her protective position. Willow's ears flattened at the intrusion of strangers, her body tensing as the paramedics approached with their unfamiliar equipment and sharp medicinal scents. It took Jack's weathered hand on her neck and soft murmurs close to her ear to prevent her from rising to full defensive posture. The mare reluctantly allowed the medical team access to Emma, though her vigilant eyes never left them as they established IV lines and checked vital signs with brisk professionalism. Emma's face, pale and drawn with exhaustion, crumpled with distress as they prepared to transfer her to the gurney. Her fingers remained entangled in Willow's mane, clinging to the horse with what little strength she had left. The paramedics exchanged glances of confusion as Emma weakly refused to release her grip. Her eyes filled with tears as she looked from the mare to Jack and back again. The question in those eyes required no words to interpret. What would happen to the horse who had somehow known she needed help when all of humanity had failed her? Jack understood immediately what others could not. This wasn't just a woman concerned about an animal's welfare. This was a recognition of a debt that could never be properly repaid. The bond formed in crisis between woman and horse transcended logical explanation, yet was as real as the baby struggling to enter the world too soon. His gaze shifted to where the auction manager stood conferring with Willow's previous owner, a red-faced man gesturing angrily at the disruption while simultaneously calculating how to extract himself from responsibility for the now infamous mare. With the clarity that sometimes comes in moments of crisis, Jack made his decision. His arthritic legs carried him across the sawdust-covered floor toward the pair of men, his weathered checkbook emerging from his back pocket. Before he'd even reached them, the negotiations were brief and one-sided. The owner wanted nothing more than to be rid of the dangerous mare, especially after her very public display had decimated any remaining value she might have had. Jack didn't haggle over the insultingly low price, recognizing it as the bargain it was, not in monetary terms, but in what it would mean to the young woman now being loaded onto the ambulance. When Jack returned to Emma's side, her eyes were already asking the question. Her lips were too weak to form. His simple nod of confirmation brought the first real smile to her pain-ravaged face. As the paramedics prepared to wheel her out, Jack leaned close, promising in hushed tones that Willow would be waiting when she and her baby returned from the hospital. The relief in Emma's expression was worth far more than the paltry sum scrawled on the check in his pocket. The auction house slowly returned to order as Emma was taken away, auctioneers attempting to reclaim the day's schedule and buyers reluctantly drifting back to their seats. Jack stood alone with Willow in the center of the floor, his hand resting on her scarred neck as he contemplated the unlikely chain of events that had led to this moment. Wealthy patrons stepped carefully around them, giving the famous auction house mare a wide berth. But Jack noticed something new in their sidelong glances. Not fear or disdain, but a reluctant respect for the animal who had somehow known what none of them had bothered to see. The morning sun bathed the rejuvenated Wilson farm in golden light, as tiny boots took their first uncertain steps across the grassy paddock. Lily Wilson, her wispy brown hair catching the breeze, wobbled forward with the determined concentration that only 1-year-olds can muster. Just 10 feet away, Willow grazed peacefully, her once dull coat now gleaming with health. The scars of her past still visible, but faded beneath proper care and nutrition. The mare's ears flicked forward at the sound of those halting footsteps, her head rising to watch with the same intense focus that had drawn her through the auction house that fateful day. Emma sat on the weathered porch steps, her camera forgotten, in her lap as she watched her daughter's milestone journey. The farm around them bore little resemblance to the failing property she had nearly lost 12 months earlier. The peeling paint had been refreshed, the sagging fences mended, and the fields once choked with weeds now sprouted healthy crops that promised a secure harvest. The foreclosure notices were gone, replaced by sustainable payment plans, and a ledger that, while modest, now balanced at the end of each month. The change had begun with Jack Mercer, whose purchase of Willow had merely been the first step in his unexpected involvement with the Wilson farm. The story of the auction house miracle had spread through the community like wildfire. The dangerous mare who had broken free to save a pregnant woman everyone else had ignored. Local news stations had arrived at the hospital to capture the heartwarming tale, their coverage catching the attention of viewers who recognized a modern-day parable when they saw one. Donations had arrived first, followed by volunteers, farmers, tradespeople, and even former auction house patrons, touched by the unlikely bond between woman and horse. Weekend work parties transformed the dilapidated Wilson property while Emma recovered from premature delivery. By the time she brought tiny Lily home from the NICU weeks later, the farm had been reborn through the kindness of strangers, inspired by Willow's extraordinary act of compassion. The mare herself had transformed just as dramatically under Jack's patient guidance. She had slowly shed the defensive behaviors born from years of mistreatment. The animal who had once sent handlers to the hospital now gently took carrots from Lily's tiny palms, her soft muzzle, careful not to frighten the child who had been named after the white marking on Willow's forehead, a lily-shaped star that Emma swore hadn't been there before that fateful day at Thornfield. Scientists and skeptics might dismiss the connection between the traumatized mare and desperate woman as coincidence or anthropomorphism, but Emma knew different. On quiet evenings when Lily slept soundly in her crib, Emma would sometimes find Willow standing at the paddock fence, her intelligent eyes fixed on the nursery window as if checking on her small charge. Some bonds defied rational explanation, formed in moments of crisis when souls recognized something in each other that transcended species. Jack had become a regular visitor, his veterinary knowledge giving way to grandfatherly affection for both Lily and Willow. Though he insisted he'd done nothing special, the weathered check framed on Emma's wall told a different story. Proof that sometimes a split-second decision could change the trajectory of multiple lives forever. As Lily's uncertain steps carried her closer to Willow, Emma felt a familiar lump form in her throat. The mare lowered her head with infinite gentleness, her breath ruffling the toddler's hair as tiny fingers reached up to touch the soft muzzle that had once been deemed too dangerous for handlers to approach. In that quiet moment of connection, Emma saw the truth that Thornfield's wealthy patrons had missed, that the value of a life, human or animal, could never be measured in dollars or bloodlines, only in the capacity for compassion when it mattered most. If you were touched by Willow and Emma's incredible journey, please don't forget to like this video and subscribe to our channel for more stories of the unbreakable bonds between humans and horses. Thank you so much for watching. I'll hope to see you in the next video.